and I was trying to clean things in a way where I did not want I didn't want my sons to walk in their mother's blood, coming and knocking on my bedroom door. I didn't want them to see blood on the door. I didn't want them to see blood in the sunroom. I didn't want them to see blood on the carpet. But it was at the point where I got to the carpet where I'm like, I'm just making it worse. And I had been drinking.
This is Kenneth Harden, Jr., a 39-year-old street preacher and self-described minister who shot and killed his 40-year-old wife, Carrie Harden, 9 times with a handgun in their gated Fayetteville home on August 20th, 2024. But what happened after the shooting is where this case takes an absolutely chilling turn.
We're not interested in a building, your tithes and your offerings, but we are interested in you seeing Jesus in us. Seeing him in such a way where it provokes you to change. Very recently on this corner, I preached from the subject, aren't you tired yet? You ought to be tired of seeing the community be in the way that it is. With the church on just about every corner, the homicide rate continues to rise, and still, for most of us, we do nothing. We have become immune to the killing, to the abuse, to our children who day by day lose their lives. But I declare unto you today that I believe that God has got something better.
Before we get into the details of what happened that night and the desperate attempt to cover up this crime, let me take you back to who Carrie Harden was. Because understanding her success, her ambition, and her plans to escape this marriage is exactly what led to her death. Before Carrie Harden was a victim of domestic violence, she was a powerhouse. Born and raised in St. Charles County, Missouri, Carrie graduated from Fort Sumwalt South High School in 2003 and went on to become a registered nurse. But she didn't stop there. She built something extraordinary from the ground up. Carrie founded Nurses E. Arn It Medical Staffing Group, a multi-million-dollar staffing company that operated nationwide, serving all 50 states and U.S. territories. Friends and colleagues described her as someone who genuinely cared about advocating for nurses and patients, someone who went above and beyond to help others succeed in their careers.
Yvonne Smith told me that Carrie had once used her own college school textbook money to pay for a friend's electric bill, and when that friend couldn't pay her back, well, she's the one who worked extra shifts to make sure that she could buy her college textbooks.
Her mother, Yvonne Smith, would later share stories that painted a picture of someone with a heart of gold. That's the kind of person she was: generous, hardworking, and selfless. She had built a life that should have been celebrated, a business empire that proved her resilience, and 2 young sons who depended on her. But behind the success and the beautiful home in the gated community on Merlin Court, there was something much darker happening. Her friends, Alicia Allen and Chastity Adams Miller, later revealed that Carrie had endured years of controlling behavior from Kenneth. The relationship was plain toxic.
Kenny had bust out the window to the bathroom to get to her and chased her down the road with a gun.
Kenneth, who presented himself publicly as a man of faith, a street preacher spreading messages of hope and salvation, was privately manipulative and abusive. There had even been an incident about 10 years earlier where Kenneth allegedly broke into a bathroom with a gun and chased Carrie. But at the time, she didn't report it to the authorities. Like so many victims of domestic violence, Carrie kept the full extent of what she was experiencing hidden from most people. But in the days and weeks leading up to August 20th, 2024, Carrie had finally made a decision. She was done and was getting out the marriage. She had accepted a position at the Cochran VA Medical Center in St. Louis, not through her own staffing company, but directly through the VA hospital. She was planning to relocate back to Missouri with her 2 sons to start fresh, to escape Kenneth and the years of abuse. She had even reached out to a divorce attorney to begin the legal process of ending the marriage. One of her friends later shared that Carrie had asked if she and her boys could stay with her temporarily while she figured out the logistics of the move. Everything was in motion.
She had plans for that Monday, but she would get back to me and let me know what was going on. My daughter didn't make it to that point.
And Kenneth knew that she was planning to leave. He knew she had accepted the job in St. Louis, and once she walked out that door with their sons, his control over her would be gone. And for a man who had spent years manipulating and dominating his wife, that loss of control was apparently unbearable. That's the motive investigators would piece together. This wasn't a crime of passion in the traditional sense. It was about power, control, and the rage of a man who couldn't handle his wife reclaiming her life. So what exactly happened on August 20th? According to investigators and Kenneth's own confession, the evening started with an argument fueled by alcohol. The details of what was said between them remain somewhat unclear, but what is crystal clear is how it ended. Kenneth grabbed a Smith & Wesson M&P Shield 2.0 handgun and fired between 7 and 8 shots. The autopsy would later confirm that Carrie sustained 9 gunshot wounds, suggesting there may have been a slight miscount in his confession or additional shots fired. The shooting took place inside their home, and investigators would later find bullet holes throughout the house and bloodstains on the carpet that Kenneth had frantically tried to scrub clean.
Inside, investigators would make some gruesome discoveries. First of all, bloodstains that they say showed Harden had tried to clean up after shooting his wife. Also, bullet holes. Investigators say Harden shot Carrie 9 times.
Kenneth claims that at some point before Carrie took her last breath, she said she was sorry, that she shouldn't have said what she said. But whether that detail is true or just part of his attempt to paint himself in a more sympathetic light, we'll never know. What we do know is that instead of calling 911, instead of trying to get her help, Kenneth panicked. But his panic wasn't about saving his wife, it was about saving himself. Their 2 sons, aged 8 and 11, were asleep in the house during the shooting. Kenneth's concern, at least according to what he told investigators later, was that his sons would wake up and see their mother's body or the blood-soaked scene. So he made a choice that would haunt investigators when they finally pieced together what happened. Kenneth dragged Carrie's lifeless body through the house, leaving a blood trail that he'd later try to clean. He pulled her outside into the backyard of their beautiful gated community home, and that's when his attempt to destroy the evidence really began. Kenneth poured gasoline on Carrie's body in a pit in their backyard and set it on fire, attempting to incinerate her remains completely. But things didn't go according to plan. The fire flared back so violently that it nearly caused the gasoline can's safety valve to explode. Panicking even more, Kenneth grabbed a white bucket, ran to the pool, filled it with water, and doused the flames before the situation spiraled further out of control. The attempt to burn his wife's body had failed. So, Kenneth moved to Plan B. He dug a shallow grave in the wooded area behind their home, near the dog kennels. He placed Carrie's partially burned remains into the grave, covered her body with yard debris, and marked the spot with a log so he could remember where he'd buried her. The whole cover-up was methodical in some ways, frantic in others. But one thing was clear. Kenneth was trying to buy himself time. The next morning, on August 20th, 2024, Kenneth did something that makes this case even more disturbing. He woke up his 2 sons and took them to the school bus stop like it was any other day.
So they went to school on Tuesday, never seeing their mother.
While his sons were at school, Kenneth was busy setting up his escape. He called his father and confessed over the phone that he had killed Carrie, claiming it was self-defense. He told his father that Carrie had threatened to leave him, that she had reached for a gun, and that he'd been forced to shoot her to protect himself. But Kenneth's father, clearly shaken by the confession, flew to Georgia, as his son requested. When Kenneth's father arrived, Kenneth didn't waste any time. He took his father to a bank and transferred all of his financial assets to him, along with custody of the 2 boys. It was like Kenneth was tying up loose ends, making sure everything was in order before he disappeared. He handed over his last will and testament, basically preparing for the worst-case scenario, which was getting caught or potentially ending his own life. Then, with everything arranged, Kenneth got into his white Cadillac and drove away, heading 450 miles southwest toward Louisiana. But Kenneth's father was horrified by what he'd been told. And once Kenneth was gone, his father called 911 to report what his son had confessed. That call came in around 10 a.m. on August 21, 2024, and it immediately set off a massive investigation. Deputies from the Fayette County Sheriff's Office, led by Sergeant Tawela Wilson of the Criminal Investigations Division, rushed to the Merlin Court home to conduct a welfare check. When they arrived, the house looked relatively normal from the outside. But once they got inside, the evidence told a very different story. Investigators found bloodstains on the carpet and bullet holes in the walls, clear evidence that something violent had occurred. Deputies immediately began searching the large property, which included the house and the extensive wooded backyard. They brought in a cadaver dog specialist named Tracy Sargent, and that dog didn't take long to do its job. The dog first located the burn pit where Kenneth had attempted to incinerate Carrie's body.
I got almost basically two calls at the same time that the cadaver dog located our victim, which was buried in a very shallow grave on the back part of the property, and at the same time that the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office took him into custody without incident.
Sheriff Barry Babb, who had almost 40 years of law enforcement experience at the time, held a news briefing shortly after the discovery and described this case as one of the most grisly crimes he'd ever worked.
The crime scene photos that were later released to the public after Kenneth's sentencing show just how horrific the scene was. There's the scrubbed carpet with bloodstains still visible despite Kenneth's efforts to clean it. There's the burn pit in the backyard with remnants of what Kenneth had tried to destroy. And there's the shallow grave where Carrie's body was ultimately found. These images tell the story of a man who was desperate to hide what he'd done, who thought he could literally bury the truth and get away with it. But while deputies were uncovering the evidence in Fayette County, Georgia, Kenneth was already in Covington, Louisiana, holed up in a motel in St. Tammany Parish. Investigators were able to track Kenneth's location thanks to license plate readers and the OnStar system in his Cadillac. Kenneth later admitted in his confession that he knew OnStar would be his undoing, that he couldn't rip the system out of the car, and that he tried to keep his gas station stops under 5 minutes to stay mobile and avoid being tracked effectively. But it didn't matter. Law enforcement was already on him. On the evening of August 21st, a SWAT team from the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office surrounded the motel where Kenneth was staying. There was a brief standoff, but Kenneth eventually came out of his room without incident and was taken into custody. Investigators later revealed that Kenneth had been heavily armed and had even considered suicide by cop, which made his peaceful surrender a huge relief for everyone involved, especially given recent shootings of law enforcement officers in nearby Paulding and Carroll counties. Kenneth was booked as a fugitive and held without bond while he waited to be extradited to Georgia. Here's where things get even stranger. When Fayette County investigators flew to Louisiana the very next morning to interview Kenneth, they found him incredibly cooperative.
He is completely cooperating to the point that I will tell you that Captain Lee, who has been an investigator at least 3 decades, said, "I've never had a homicide suspect want to tell us everything."
He walked investigators through the entire night. He even admitted that he hadn't made a final decision on where to run to, that he considered Mexico, but didn't know if he was prepared to walk across the desert to get there.
And I was trying to clean things in a way where I did not want my sons to walk in their mother's blood, coming and knocking on my bedroom door. I didn't want them to see blood on the door. I didn't want them to see blood in the sunroom. I didn't want them to see blood on the carpet. But it was at the point where I got to the carpet where I'm like, I'm just making it worse. And I had been drinking.
But Kenneth's confession wasn't just about admitting what he'd done. It was about trying to control the narrative, trying to make people understand why he did it, as if there could ever be a justification for murdering his wife 9 times and burying her in the backyard. Throughout his interrogation with detectives, Kenneth kept returning to one central theme. He wanted them to believe it was the tragic endpoint of years of what he claimed was infidelity and humiliation from Carrie. Kenneth told investigators a story that dated back years, claiming that he'd been shot at Magic City Strip Club while taking Carrie's family members out for the night. He admitted that the reason they ended up at that club in the first place was that he was dating a young woman who worked there.
I shot in Magic City, taking her family members out for the night. I chose a lot of other different places, but the reason we ended up in Magic City because I was on the side dating a young lady that works at the club. I ended up in a relationship with this woman because of some behaviors that Carrie exhibited from the span of 2018 up until the present.
He claimed Carrie had been involved with another woman and had humiliated him in front of his family members on multiple occasions, and that those incidents were the catalyst for most of their arguments.
And I felt kind of like I got judged by getting shot. What was interesting is after I got shot and I'm at the hospital and Carrie had my phone and she had my Apple Watch. She went through my Apple Watch and read a lot of that was in my phone. When I woke up from surgery, she was standing over me with a look and I'm like, okay, so she knows now. And we came home and she said, I just want to know why. And I told her, I said, you've hurt me bad. And she said, well, I didn't think it was a problem because it's with another woman. And I'm like, nah, it's still a problem because it's not something you and I mutually agreed to. I'm just having to deal with it because you feel like it's something that I like.
Kenneth used all of this to build a case for why he was so angry, why their relationship had deteriorated to the point where he felt justified in his rage. But here's the thing. None of that, even if it's all true, justifies murder. The motive that investigators ultimately concluded was that Carrie's plans to leave Kenneth and relocate to St. Louis with their children were what triggered his violent response. Kenneth's confession also revealed just how calculated some of his actions were. He mentioned monitoring the home's extensive security camera system remotely, even while he was on the run, watching as deputies arrived and secured the scene.
But then what confirmed that I had made the correct decision was when you all went to secure the home. When you came in the triangle, I'm like, I made the right decision today.
The investigators also noted that the security footage from the property was suspiciously missing the critical moments of the crime, which strongly suggests Kenneth deleted or tampered with it. He admitted that he knew if deputies had arrived while he was still at the house, he didn't know if he could promise he would have surrendered peacefully, saying he would have felt like they were invading his castle and that it would have been in him to fight back. After Kenneth was extradited to Georgia, he was formally charged with felony murder, concealing the death of another, and possession of a firearm during the commission of the felony. The case moved through the court system relatively quickly. On June 23, 2025, Kenneth appeared in Fayette County Superior Court before Judge Rhonda B. Kreuziger for his plea hearing. He pled guilty to felony murder and the related charges, avoiding a trial and accepting responsibility for what he'd done. But even in that moment, Kenneth tried to ask for mercy. He requested a reduced sentence, hoping the judge would take into account his cooperation with investigators and whatever else he believed should work in his favor. Judge Kreuziger wasn't having it.
He'd asked for less, but the judge said that the mercy that he wanted is mercy he should have shown his wife, Carrie.
Kenneth was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, meaning he will die behind bars. On top of that, he received an additional 10-year sentence for concealing Carrie's death and a 5-year sentence for possessing a firearm during the commission of the felony. In total, Kenneth will spend the rest of his life in prison for what he did. District Attorney Marie Broder spoke after the sentencing, emphasizing that while no amount of prison time could bring Carrie back, the sentence provided some measure of justice for her dignity and legacy. The two young boys, now 8 and 11 years old at the time of Carrie's death, were placed in the custody of Kenneth's father, who now lives in the family home on Merlin Court. Meanwhile, Carrie's mother, Yvonne Smith, has been fighting for guardianship, wanting to give her grandsons stability and a connection to their mother's side of the family. The legal battle over the children's custody is ongoing, and it's heartbreaking to think about what these boys have gone through. They lost their mother to violence, their father is in prison for life, and their entire world has been shattered. What do you think about this terrible case of domestic violence? Do you also think Carrie should have moved more quietly, knowing the kind of man she was dealing with? Let me know what you think in the comments section.